Today, I will not be talking too much about the biofuel preparation and production, but mostly about the applications that biofuels can have. And just to give, just to give a little bit of the frame of my work, it is no surprise for everyone that we are facing a climate crisis, mostly because of extensive use of petroleum sources, and those extensive use of petroleum sources is also what allow us to have the way of life that we have today, in terms of transportation, in terms of materials, in terms of energy. So in order to have the comfort that we have today, that came with a price, which is the emissions of CO2. And we must find, of course, if we want to sustain our way of life, we have to find alternatives to those sources. But when we look at the emissions of CO2, we see that over the last 100 years, the increase from the emissions is exponential. And this is because, of course, that the extensive use that we, over the last 100 years of the development of our society, our technology, and mostly because we have a fossil-based economy, the increase was exponentially. Although we must look at this time here, in the middle of the 19th century, that the emissions are quite low. And this is important because we have to think a little bit about our past in order to construct our future in a most solid way. And when we look to that emissions, that year, around that year, in 1856, is the first recollection of a study regarding the effect that CO2 can have in the atmosphere. This woman, Eunice Foote, which, by the way, it's also a remarkable scientist, but also an amazing woman because she was responsible for women to voting in America. But this woman made a simple and straightforward experiment where she placed CO2 inside of glass cylinders with a thermometer, and of course she placed the cylinders in the sun, and of course the ones with CO2 and water were the ones that has a higher temperature. And so she said, of course, that an atmosphere enriched with CO2 could in fact lead to higher temperatures. So we had this information many years ago, but still we continue to develop our fossil sources based economy, and now we must solve this problem in a very short period of time. We could have had lots of time to start thinking about these things, but in fact only on the 70s occurred the first meeting of the United Nations to try to solve this problem. So we have here a time span where we didn't do anything about this issue, and now we have to solve this issue very quickly in order to have a planet for the generations to come, and also for us to live a normal and healthy life. Moreover, despite the emissions, we are spending petroleum very fast. If we remember that the petroleum that we are spending now was formed between 350 and 150 million years ago, we are spending petroleum very fast. We heard a lot talk about petroleum depletion, and one can argue that depletion will not occur soon because every day new reserves are being discovered, and it is true. But sooner or later we will have a shortage in petroleum, because if we continue to spend petroleum at this rate, it will have, of course, it will not last forever. And when we look at the chemicals, for example, they are still more than 80% based on petroleum sources. And we want to decrease this dependency. Regarding energy, we still have a lot dependency on fossil sources. For example, more than 60% is still based on fossil sources. So we must find alternatives to this dependency. And what can we do? I look here and I look lots of persons, Professor Carlos, Professor Enrique, Professor Joana, Professor Filipe, all are working on trying to solve this problem. And I think that in the end, the solution will be a contribution of all these works in order for a common good, because there will not be just one solution. And of course, that we can do a lot, and while these processes are being developed, are being improved, are being optimized in order to be more efficient, we can try to find alternatives. And for more than 100 years now, the carbon dioxide is acknowledged as a raw material. We can use this raw material to produce several chemicals, energy. We know that carbon is the base of life. So we have to start looking for a way to capture this CO2 in order to make materials, chemicals, energy. And most of you are working on those technologies. But meanwhile, while we cannot have the technologies mature enough or efficient enough to allow that we can capture the CO2 from the atmosphere and make it at rather larger scales, and also because I also think that the final solution for the problem will be a collection of several technologies that can somehow complement each other in order to achieve the neutrality that we are looking for. And biomass, we know that biomass is a way, it's a raw material that is abundant, it's renewable, it's available, and it's carbon neutral. So we can look to this raw material and try to find ways to transform this raw material in something that we can use to make chemicals, to make materials, to make energy. And even more, because when we look to the global biomass, the plants are 80% of this biomass. And to put in perspective, animals are just 0.4% of all biomass. So we will see that plants are widely available and abundant. The challenge is how can we use plants to make materials, for example, plastics, fuels, and so on. We know that plants, through the photosynthesis, can convert CO2 in sugars. Then those sugars, those carbohydrates, can be converted in, for example, phenylalanine through the shikimate pathway, and phenylalanine can then be converted in alkyl phenols. And we know that these carbohydrates and these alkyl phenols are then the main components of the three most abundant biopolymers: cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin. So we have these three biopolymers, and now we just have to see how can we process these biopolymers in order to have something that we can work with to produce those chemicals, those materials, those fuels. And there is a lot of technologies that we can use to process biomass. Well, the most primitive one was in fact used for combustion to produce heat. But by producing just heat or by combustion, we are losing all the potential of the biomass. The process in which I have been working on and in which I am most interested is the thermochemical processes, in particular those that can produce biooils. The biooil can then be used for several applications. In particular, to produce biooil, we have fast pyrolysis, hydrothermal liquefaction, and solvolysis. Solvolysis we often call as well acid catalyzed liquefaction, for example, or hydrothermal liquefaction. But there are differences between these three approaches. Of course, for example, on the fast pyrolysis, we need the biomass to be dried, so it requires a pre-treatment, for example. Although it can produce, for example, a synthesis gas, which is also interesting for other transformations. On the other hand, the hydrothermal liquefaction and solvolysis, we can work with the biomass with moisture, for example. The one that I've been working with is the solvolysis. Hydrothermal liquefaction, it has to be conducted with high pressure, with high temperatures, and the solvolysis can be conducted at atmospheric pressure and with the addition of a catalyst. Of course, the yields are different. Of course, for example, the solvolysis, the one that I work with, has the drawback that needs a solvent, so we must look for greener solvents. But on the other hand, it requires less expensive equipment to work. Regarding the composition, of course, that we have different processes to produce biooils, and of course we will have different biooils. The one that I've been working with, the one from Salvolysis, has the lower amount of oxygen, because most of the oxygen that is present on the biomass is eliminated through the dehydration during the process, and we lose that oxygen as water. And because water is being removed from the reaction as long as the bio-oil is forming, we are left with a bio-oil with less oxygen. Well, the concept behind this is quite simple. So we have these three biopolymers, cellulose and cellulose and lignin. Then with the catalyst we cut several bonds, and we are left with smaller fragments. Most of them are liquid, and most of these fragments we can then use to make whatever we want. So, and it is this part that we have been investigating, the applications that bio-oils can have. Because the production of bio-oil is quite well studied, the applications is where we have to make an effort in order to have real-life applications of the bio-oils in order to see if we can apply this then in the future at a real-life scenario. So mostly what we do is we collect biomass and residues, we make the liquefaction, then we can separate those bio-oils into different fractions. For example, if I wash the bio-oil with water, I am left with an aqueous extract, an organic extract, but then, for example, I can distill the bio-oil and have a lighter fraction and a heavy fraction, so I can play then with the bio-oil in order to obtain some feedstocks for several applications. Of course, that we have applied this to lots of substrates. In particularly, we are very interested in valuing residues. So we have applied this to sludges, to manures, to agriculture residues, to food residues. Well, we have applied this to a whole bunch of biomasses. It works well with almost type of biomasses, even with those with high moisture. For example, potato skin, potato peel has 80% of biomass and it works quite well. Sludges, which has also a high amount of moisture, also works quite well. And of course, that in the beginning, we start doing the liquefaction with 2-ethylhexanol, which is a fossil-based solvent. But now we have moved on and we have studied other solvents, ones based on glycerol, for example, that are more sustainable. And that also gives very good results. The reaction can also be promoted with ultrasounds and microwaves, but what we get from using those technologies are not enough to start using them, because we have an improvement of 2 or 3% on yield, and it's not enough. So basically, as I told you, we have the biomass, we produce the bio-oil, we make several fractions, and then we study how can we value these products. As I told you, we are studying these products to produce chemicals, energy, or bio-based materials. And this work started a few years ago when Cork Supply, which is a Cork company, came to us and asked us to find a way to value their residues. Their residues are mostly cork granules or cork powder. And they wanted us to find a way to use those residues in a way that we can retrieve more value from them instead of just burning them. So one of the first approaches was to produce a bio-oil from those residues. And then we were looking how can we use that bio-oil to make something that they asked us. They asked us to make an adhesive. And one thing at the time that we tried to do was to retrieve the sugars from the bio-oil, because the sugars are the products of the hydrolysis of cellulose and hemicellulose. And we tried to use these sugars to produce an adhesive. And this adhesive was that we made was an aqueous-based adhesive that is now patented in several countries. And we start by using small amounts of an isocyanate that is compatible with water. At that time, this small amount of isocyanate was still fossil-based. Presently, we have already a bio-based version of this isocyanate. And we mix this isocyanate with our aqueous extract. But we didn't were successful in obtaining a good adhesive, because the viscosity was so low that we have that adhesive drain from the material and don't bond the material together. And then we added some cork powder to increase the viscosity, and in that case we already have a bond. Then, after optimizing the formulation, we get this formulation where the bond was so good that when we make the torsion test, instead of breaking in the bond, we break the material itself. So meaning that we have a very good adhesive. We then compare this adhesive with other commercial ones, for example, with the epoxy adhesives and wood glue adhesives, and the results of our adhesive was as good, and in some cases better than the ones that are commercial. And we see here even better than the material. So we were happy with these results. Then we test this glue also with wood, and it works quite well. Afterwards, another thing that we do, since we have an application for the aqueous extract, is why not using the organic fraction to produce foams. Polyurethane foams are made from an isocyanate and a polyol. Normally this polyol is fossil-based, so we envisage that maybe we can replace this polyol by the organic fraction of the bio-oil. And the organic fraction of bio-oil has an OH number between 200 more or less and 300, which is common on fossil-based polyols, and has a very low acid value. So we decided to replace the whole polyol on the formulation of foams with two polyols made from eucalyptus and made from cork. What we witnessed was that in fact we have the reference foam, and the two foams that we have prepared, the one from eucalyptus and the one from cork, the one from eucalyptus had a lower Young modulus, but the one with cork had a very good properties, very good mechanical properties. And this is because, if we remember, that cork has lots of subrine, and by having lots of subrine, we'll have lower contents of lignin. And we know by experience that composites with higher amounts of lignin tends to give better mechanical properties. And so, by using these cork-based polyols, we were able to produce a foam that has higher amounts of bio-based materials. And this was, I guess, probably the second or the third application that we have developed. Another application that we started a few years ago as a test, and now on the project Better Plastics we are exploring, is to use part of the bio-oil in the production of bioplastics. Polyhydroxyalkanoates are bioplastics that are produced by bacteria. Those bacteria take a substrate, normally a substrate of carbohydrates, and transform those carbohydrates into energy, and then store that energy as a bioplastic inside of the cells. The same way that we store fat. Okay? So they heat, let's say they heat the carbohydrates and store that energy as a bioplastic inside of the cells. They are called biohydroxyalkanoates. So a few years ago, we sent our aqueous extract to a colleague from South Korea that has a very good strength to produce this type of polymers, and he tested our extract, and what we have witnessed was that half of the substrate, half of the quantity of our extract was enough to produce the same amount of colonies that he was able to produce with 1% of glucose. Even in the accumulation of polyhydroxyalkanoates, with just half of the substrate of our extract was good enough to produce more polyhydroxyalkanoates, more bioplastics. And the bacteria was also able, besides producing polyhydroxyalkanoates, produce these pigments, carotenoids, and the behavior was inversely. When we increase the amount of polyhydroxyalkanoates, we decrease the amount of carotenoids. And this was the base. Then, a few years later, that the consortium Better Plastics invited us to, or challenged us to try to do this here in Portugal in the SCT Nova. In the SCT Nova, they also produce polyhydroxyalkanoates, and we wanted to see if with our extract they can produce polyhydroxyalkanoates for the production of food packages and films. So, as I was telling them on the Better Plastics project, which is a very big project, they asked us to use our extracts from, in this case, we use extracts from eucalyptus to produce bioplastics. And so we gave our extract, and our extract is mainly composed by fructose, xylose, glucose, trialose, and saccharose. And with our extract, they were able to use. So they were able to use our extract. They have a very big growth on several. They tested several strains. They have a very big growth on the colonies, but the accumulation of polyhydroxyalkanoates was very, very, very low. This means that our extract is not toxic for the bacteria. In fact, they promote the increase on the colonies, although they are inhibiting the accumulation of polyhydroxyalkanoates, those bioplastics. And what we thought that one of the things that can be happening. Okay, so because the pH was very, very low, so we try to solve this problem, of course, and we try to neutralize that pH with ammonium hydroxide. We had a bigger increase, but still we have a very small amount of accumulation of the bioplastics. Now we will have two hypotheses that we have to solve in order to see if we can increase the accumulation. One is because while neutralizing using ammonium hydroxide, we were increasing a lot the salinity. When we increase the salinity, the accumulation of polyhydroxyalkanoates is inhibited. So we have to solve this problem. This problem can be solved just by instead of using ammonium hydroxide, if you use an ion exchange resin. The other problem that we meanwhile notice is that when we make an NMR, we see here, we see here that we have the signals from the sugars, but then we identify those signals here, which are common on phenolic compounds, and also these signals here, which are common on the aliphatic compounds. But as we are talking about the natural extract, how did some aliphatics or phenolics that don't have that affinity to water were in the water? I must remind you that during the bio-oil, there is lots of reactions that is occurring. And one of the reactions that can occur is a reaction between the carbohydrates, the phenols, for example, and some part of the solvent. And one of those reactions is the formation of glycosides. Glycosides are a sugar moiety that is linked to another thing, for example, a phenol by a CO bond. And if those reactions occur, we can have some residues of phenols and aliphatics on the glycosides extract. And we also know that the presence of phenols on the extract can inhibit the formation of polyhydroxyalkanoates. And one evidence that in fact we have some O glycosides is because of these signals here. These signals here, around between 90 and 100 in terms of carbon, are very typical of O glycosides, of the aromatic carbon. And so we have to find a way also to remove the phenols in order to avoid having the inhibition in the production of the bioplastics. And we can do that by using this gel. This gel captures the phenols, and we are left with a phenol-free extract. We have done this, and at this point we are testing this extract, this clean extract, to try to see if we can produce, in fact, the polyhydroxyalkanoates. Of course, that you can say, but we were able to produce this on the strains from our colleague from South Korea. And the thing is that each group that uses this type of bacteria engineers the bacteria, the strains of bacteria, to use certain types of substrates. So each group has its own strains of bacteria. Ones are more tolerant than others, but then the others that are not tolerant, for example, produce more pHa. So each group has its own bacteria, so this is why we have some different results. Another application, of course, is to use, this is the obvious one, is to use the bio-oils as energy source. And when we look at here, we see that the bio-oil has a better calorific value than the biomass. And this can be a little strange. Why do you have a better calorific value if we start from a biomass? It's because mostly biomass, the fresh biomass always has some moisture. And then, as I told you, during the production of bio-oil, lots of the content of oxygen is eliminated through dehydration. And so the bio-oil usually has lower oxygen content, which of course will lead to a better calorific value. And also, if we look at here, the very prevalent diagram, we see that on this part we have the lignocellulosic biomass. Here we have the hydrocarbons, and on this lower part we have the tars and the coals. As we see here, in this zone where we have the biomass, after liquefaction there is a shift towards the hydrocarbon zone, meaning that in fact our bio-oil has more similarities to the hydrocarbon than with its original biomass. And this difference is even more remarkable when we are talking about just the organic extract. If we take the bio-oil and remove the sugars are the most oxidized part of the bio-oil. Of course, if I remove that part from the organic fraction, the organic fraction that is left has a much better calorific value. And we can see here, for example, when I remove the sugars, I improve the eating value. And of course, that we can envisage to use this fraction as a fuel. More important also is how this bio-oil, this organic fraction, behave when we try under oxidizing atmospheres. And in fact, when we make the combustion of this bio-oil, the problem sometimes with this type of bio-oils is that when you try to make combustion, lots of the part of the bio-oil is lost as volatiles. The volatiles do not burn itself; it just vaporizes. And what we see here is that most of our bio-oil produces mostly CO2, but of course we cannot forget that this CO2 is mostly biogenic. Okay. Produces a small amount of water and a small amount of carbon monoxide, and then a very reduced amount of volatiles. Meaning that maybe we can try to use this bio-oil, this organic fraction of the bio-oil, as a fuel. And to do so, we must assure that the shelf life of the bio-oil, or in other words, that the bio-oil don't age. So we have tested the accelerated aging, where 24 hours corresponds to 1 year. And we see that regarding the density, the bio-oil suffers no modification, meaning that probably we have very low reactive compounds on a bio-oil. That, for example, this one is from pyrolysis. Pyrolysis have lots of aldehydes that are very reactive, and of course, age has there is an increase on the density. However, there is no increase on that density. So, but because then Priu contacted us and challenged us to try to test if we could replace part of the diesel with some bio-oil. This is very interesting, but we cannot forget that despite of this bio-oil has lower oxygen content, it still has more oxygen than the diesel. So the miscibility between both is not very good. So we have to make emulsions. And we are now studying some emulsions using small amounts of a surfactant, of a tensioactive, to try to make several mixtures with our bio-oil for further tests in the combustion engine. To see if in fact, just like now it happens with biodiesel, if we can incorporate some of the bio-oil on diesel. This application is now having some very good results, and this application has to do with, just like we produce bitumen by distillation of petroleum, for example, the bitumen is used on road pavement. We thought that maybe we can use our bio-oil, we can distill our bio oil, and then use it as a replacement in the bitumen, in the road pavement. So what we have did was to extract the sugars and then vacuum distill the bio oils to produce a heavy fraction that can be blended or can be used instead of the bitumen. We know that we have to have characterization of this product, and we know that, of course, since our heavy fraction comes from biomass, we will have different compounds. And in fact, as we see here, our bio oil have phenols and aliphatic, just like a normal bitumen, but then we also have some alcohols, some dibenzenes, some methoxides, so we have a more diverse range of compounds that we must be careful when we are trying to deal with this. But when we test the rheological properties, the viscoelasticity of our heavy fraction, we saw that we have a penetration of 47. This means that normally the bitumen that is most used for road pavement is the bitumen 3550, meaning that the penetration for that bitumen is between 35 and 50 decimillimeters. And in fact, we were left with a penetration around that value. The problem was the softening point was quite higher than the one that we used. But since the penetration, the viscoelastic properties were so good, we are now trying to make a test. And on the beginning of next week, we will make a test road, so a part of a road between Fatima and Batalha and Alcácer do Sal, and there will be a part of the road in which we will replace 11% of the bitumen with our heavy fraction. And we will see how the road behaves when we replace this fraction. To see if in the future, probably in the future we will not be able to replace all bitumen, but if we can replace a small part, I think it's good. So next week in the stage, I guess the stage center, we will be doing these things between these two places, and we'll see how it will behave. I hope it will behave good. Yes. So, another hot topic that I think most of us are very interested in, the production of hydrogen. Hydrogen is a very hot topic. Everybody is wanting to produce hydrogen sustainably. And for many years, the hydrogen was produced by simply forming of natural gas or by heavy fractions of crude. But as the awareness about CO2 emissions has increased, so most of those tube reformers were closed. But still we have lots of tube reformers. We have one in Bahrain that is stopped, and maybe we can use it. And of course, by now we are thinking, okay, so he's going to make steam reforming of bio-oils. Yes, that's exactly what we're trying to do. The steam reforming of bio-oil is not very new. It has already been studied. Most of the studies, instead of using real bio-oil, use model compounds. And the thing is, why is that? Because the bio-oils has a more, once again, the oxygen is the one that always is around to mess with us. So, because our bio-oil has more oxygen than the natural gas, for example, the higher amounts of oxygen tends to lead to coke formation, which in turn deactivates the catalyst, and of course it will lead to lower hydrogen production. And so what can we do about this? Because it would be very interesting if we can take advantage of the mature technology, as steam reformer is, to use the installations that are available but are not working, and to use a sustainable feedstock that allow us to produce a sustainable hydrogen, and even with the formation of CO2, this CO2 is biogenic. And we are still starting to work on it. The bio-oil that normally we produce, as we saw, has much lower oxygen content, so this is an advantage, that maybe we can take advantage of this lower oxygen content. But also we need to design more effective catalysts that can withstand this oxygen content without being deactivated by the formation of coke. And this is what are we doing now. And because, in fact, there is lots of potential with this technology, because steel reformings are around for many years, and we just have to find an alternative feedstock to use this technology, without, of course, the drawbacks that the fossil sources have, which is the enormous amounts of CO2 emissions. We have technically as a steam reformer, which was deactivated on the mechanical department. We are now currently putting back together the steam reforming, building a new tubular reactor, and very soon we will be starting to do these tests to see if in fact we can replace the fossil sources with one more sustainable one to produce hydrogen also in a cleaner way. And because all of these applications are very interesting, that's a fact, well, at least for me, but this can only work if it works just like a petroleum refinery do. On a petroleum refinery, all products are valued. There is no waste. And when we are trying to design a process today, we have to have this in mind. We have to work under the biorefinery concept, where everything is valued. There is no waste, there is no residues. And for example, during the liquefaction, we have the production, for example, of a solid, of a biochar. And that biochar has to be valued as well. And so, this is the BO2 value, which is part of my research contract, aims to do this. Aims to develop a process, an integrated process, that has several inputs, and all the outputs are valued. So, we have a central point, which is the production of biomass, and for this part, we are going to test the three processes. We are going to test pyrolysis, hydrothermal liquefaction, and also solvolysis. Presently, on the department, we are also available. Now we can make hydrothermal liquefaction. Soon we'll be able to do pyrolysis as well, and we'll be working with some colleagues from Italy and from Brazil that will help us on learning how to deal with these two technologies, because we have expertise in solvolysis, and to avoid starting everything from the beginning, from scratch, we will have some help of some colleagues, and we will see which bio will be better for 4 applications. One is for the production of membranes for the separation of CO2, and for CO2 capturing using the biochar. Okay, the biochar is a porous solid with lots of carbon, so we will try this to retain CO2 and to separate CO2. Another one will be to use the aqueous extract to produce not only polyhydroxyapatite, those bioplastics, but also bioethanol. And this will be done with our colleague in South Korea that has, as I told you, has a very tolerable strains of bacteria. We will try to use our extract. Of course, we will continue to study the blending of our organic fraction with diesel to see if we can, in the future, use this as a additive for diesel. And then we are going to study the part of steam reforming in the production of hydrogen. And what we want to do is to take some residues. We are going to use some residues from the production of olive oil, some refrigerated fuels, and also some forestry residues. And we will try to use these residues and try to accomplish all these applications in an integrated way, in where we don't have any wastes at what we want. And to end, if someone asked me if indeed bio-oil can be used to solve the problem, I would say bio-oil by itself, the production of bio-oil will not solve any problem. It is a contribution, it's not a solution. We still have lots of work to do, but I strongly believe that this technology, these applications can contribute in the future to try to, along with other solutions, to attain that decarbonization, that neutrality, the circularity that we are all looking for. Okay? So thank you very much. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. And